ultimately, I think and Malta can be an extremely interesting test bed for this.
Are you sure about that? I don't want to bring in another, but
No,
there was,
if I had
let's
to
say there
look
were
at-
certain failures initially.
Now, the next step is how do we integrate EMIs, electronic money institutions, payment institutions within the whole gaming sector. And I think over there is scope for Malta to try and occupy that space as well.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of the SiGMA podcast, where today we're going to be meeting, apart from a very good friend of mine, someone who I've worked with quite closely in the past in other fields, we're going to be meeting economist and partner at Seed Consultancy, JP Fabri.
Thanks,
Good morning.
Trevor. Good morning.
Good morning,
Thanks
JP.
for having me here.
Thanks for the invite. You're looking quite bright with those glasses. Me and JP, we've worked together in a different field, but in that field, which was linked a bit to politics, gaming at the time was something which the country was investing quite heavily in. Now, without wanting to go into the merits, because it's been tackled over and over again, the size and the importance of gaming in Malta's economy. But if I may ask this question, at the time when the decisions were being made to build up gaming, and you were there, what was the reasoning? What was the raison d'etre for saying, let's invest in the gaming sector?
I think it's similar to Malta's economic history in a number of sectors, right? So, as a small open island state with very limited resources, we only have one key advantage in our hands, which is the ability to be innovative when it comes to the jurisdiction, the law, the regulation. So if you look back at a number of sectors, we always looked at establishing regulatory frameworks that created a niche in the global space, be it maritime register, aviation, financial services, offshore, onshore, and all of that. Gaming at the time was something which was not regulated, right, within the European space. But there were technological advancements which were increasing the usage or the interest in gaming. So back then, Malta, as part of its broader economic diversification, and at the time we already had quite a strong IT sector, right? So it's part of the evolutionary. So you realize that there is a trend, you realize that you can be ahead of the curve by setting a regulatory framework. Why? Because you understand the power of regulation. That regulation ultimately is a stamp of trust, right? So, and back then the decision was taken to start embracing the online world related to gaming, lotteries, and all of that. And then the sector continued to evolve. So I guess over the past 15 years, we've seen quite an evolution in the gaming ecosystem, even in the gaming regulation, right?
Yes.
So
then, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 iterations of gaming around this country.
Correct. So ultimately, an economy is an ecosystem. It's a living organism, right? Which changes, which evolves, and ultimately you need to read the signs of the times. In reality, the future. Where is the market heading to? So I think
don't
now,
anticipate my questions, please.
So now I think the next big question is, where do we go from here?
Yes.
Right. So
at least let me ask that question. So where do we go from here, JP?
So if we had to see from a regulatory framework, I would say now possibly there is a sort of plateau in terms of what do you regulate next, right? From a game perspective. Now, if I had to look at the whole gaming landscape, it's being driven a lot by trends in technology. So how do we integrate a better customer experience interface technology, VR, AR, how do these come into the picture? We have the regulatory side of things, responsible gaming, right? How do we integrate that within the whole gaming experience, compliance experience, and all of that? You then have very dynamic markets of growth beyond the European markets. So we have South America, Latin America, Africa. And then you have the developments in fintech, payments. If there is one huge revolution that is taking place, is the way payments are done and the way payments are being intrinsically linked to identity as well. Right?
Payments being linked to identity. What do you mean there?
So over here we have the concept of digital identity has been is being pushed a lot by the EU. So there is a mandated EU digital wallet, digital identity, but now we're also seeing how do you integrate payments with the identity. It started with PSD2, SCA, and now
Payment Services Directive.
Directive 2.
PSD is Payment Services Directive.
Correct, 2. And now there is PSD3. PSD2 also brought the concept of open banking.
Okay.
Right? Now, how
when
do
you
we
talk about open banking again, specifically for our viewers?
Yeah, open banking is basically opening up the ability. So let me backtrack a bit. A lot of this is related to data, right? So if we look at, for example, the EU, because ultimately our reality is grounded or anchored around the European Union directives, regulations, legislative space. Data and financial data is key. So EU wants to create a European economy based on data, sharing of data, but making sure that there is the privacy element, tutelati, regulated.
Yes.
Regulated.
In order to protect.
In order to protect. So we had the first onset of GDPR and then all of that. So given that a lot of today's online economy is driven by the exchange and sharing of data, and a lot of the privacy concerns around that revolve around identity, right? So how do we safeguard one's identity, or else how do we use identity to authenticate data, to verify data, to share data?
To sometimes make life simpler.
That's it. And then all that from the gaming world, how does this integrate within the customer experience of onboarding?
Yes.
Within the regulatory element of responsible gaming, right? So, so now I think the next,
and to a certain extent, player verification, compliance, AML,
ongoing transaction monitoring, and all of that. So ultimately, I think and Malta can be an extremely interesting test bed for this. Right, so now I would say the way I see it, at least, is the next evolution within the gaming ecosystem. And here I specifically talk about ecosystem because this is the way we need to start seeing it, a cluster. So how does the gaming eco sector interact with the financial services sector? How does it interact with the AML compliance sector? How does it interact with the IT sector, which is developing identity solution based on the blockchain, based on other things? So how now do we bring all this working together in a seamless way? And I think Malta now needs to really focus on developing this ecosystem. We already started. I would say if we look at the push towards virtual reality, augmented reality, game design, over there, we're seeing that we want the ecosystem to diversify within the technology sphere, right? So with esports and all of that. So we've seen a niche in Malta that is growing and growing successfully as well, right? So from the technology dimension, we're seeing a lot of effort or a trend in the gaming world to embrace AR, VR, and all of that. The game design, and Malta stands to be a very interesting jurisdiction for that. Now we also need to see how does the gaming sector operate within the fintech world, for example. So MFSA has made very important strides in Malta's financial innovation space, right? So if we look at crypto, MiCA, today MFSA is a pioneer when it comes to regulating MiCA. The crypto assets, virtual financial assets. So
are you sure about that? I don't want to bring in another, but there was, let's say there were certain failures initially.
Correct, but
and in fact that space, because at the time I was spending quite a bit of time in Gibraltar due to a work project, but Gibraltar actually then occupied that space. A space which then they had to backtrack a bit, maybe because of the grey listing, which lasted a bit longer than expected. But at the time, Gibraltar did come in and occupy
I think if I had to look at where the EU is today with MiCA, right? The Maltese system is very much in line with that. So I would say that from a regulatory point of view, we were quite pioneering. The implementation could have been improved, but ultimately, I would say when you're in a space which wasn't very well understood as well, there were lots of concerns. We at least we took a very pushy approach, and I would say forward-looking approach as well. Now, the next step is how do we integrate EMIs, electronic money institutions, payment institutions within the whole gaming sector. And I think over there is scope for Malta to try and occupy that space as well, right? So the EU already opened that space with PSD2. So we have a lot of third-party payment institutions that set up these neobanks, these Revoluts of this world, that basically utilize a new category of license, whereby basically people connect the bank accounts, share data, and all of that. So that can help a lot. Transaction monitoring, responsible gaming. So now I think it would be interesting to see how the gaming sector can leverage these options available within the whole payment space.
Okay.
To ultimately, I would say, also improve compliance, to improve customer journeys, and all of that. So,
yeah. In fact, I actually think it's in Sweden, where the player's bank details and identity are verified on registration, because the verification is happening through
open banking.
Through open banking. Now that happened quite a few years ago.
Yes.
Why is it taking so long for other member states, because we talk about European Union, to implement such a procedure? Is it because Sweden has a regulatory environment which allows it? Is Sweden so far ahead technologically?
It's also a cultural thing, in the sense that Sweden was always more cashless.
Okay.
Right? So ultimately, your predisposition to be cashless supports your transition to an open banking ecosystem. In the EU, you also have a bit of a fragmentation when it comes to technical standards. So the UK is a trailblazer in open banking. Then you have...
But then they don't have the system.
Yes, it takes time.
I understand this southern part of Europe where cash is king still.
Cash is king.
Especially if you look at Italy, for example.
A lot of it also depends on the boardroom discussions in legacy traditional banks, right?
Okay, now this is going to get interesting.
Do you see open banking as a disruptor that can threaten you? Or actually, can you see open banking as an opportunity to innovate faster and to actually offer an easier onboarding journey, a greater range of services to your customers? So you have this dichotomy, right? Is it a threat or is it an opportunity?
And in your view, if you look at Maltese banks nowadays,
I would say Maltese banks, unfortunately, or the Maltese financial ecosystem as a laggard when it comes to open banking, right? So I think
But then Revolut has really penetrated,
correct,
especially the younger part of
and
and there are quite a few businesses now running on Revolut as well.
Correct. So here it's a transition. It's a pity that we did miss the boat when it came with PSD2, right? Because I think we could have solved a lot of issues, frustrations, onboarding, and all of that.
Was PSD2 in the same time period of us getting grey-listed?
Before.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly, but PSD2 started before.
Okay.
So there again, we're a small market, so that usually might reduce the remember, the banking sector is very risk averse in Malta, right? So we've had
the traditional
banking sector. We've had predominantly very strong returns on the property market. So it's ultimately, even if you see the access to finance for startups,
yes,
so I think that is the next transition that we need to see as well, right? So now we've seen some good initiatives being taken with the Malta Venture Capital Fund being launched. There are Malta enterprises supporting the startup scene well. We're identifying good pockets. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, and iterations have to happen. But I think when we're looking at the regulatory dimension, we need to really re-embrace our ability to be innovative from a jurisdictional point of view, right? Even if we see a traditional sector like manufacturing, we embrace innovation by doing the pharma side of things, right? Back then it was a jurisdictional innovation element in terms of patents and generics, and today Malta has a leading position in the European market. Aircraft. Today we have a fleet which is growing by
aircraft registration. We had started off with maintenance.
Correct. So even the maritime started with your big tankers. Today it's super yachts and all of that. So ultimately, the success of a country depends on how you continue to evolve your current industries. It's not about bringing new ones or setting up new ones. In reality, it's an evolution of sectors that are here, but that embrace other areas or the trends that you foresee will drive that sector in the future.
So we're talking about gaming.
Yes.
So if you look at gaming, I understand all the feeder parts into the gaming sector, you can see an evolution over there. But the games per se, the product, you don't see much evolution over there. We had a few weeks ago James Davies, the chief commercial for Wicked Games, which is a new subsidiary within the entire SiGMA group, and I'd like to thank James also for making quite an interesting show that day. But we did talk about product innovation, or rather lack of innovation. So you have all this innovation going around, but at the end of the day, the product itself has not changed much. How can one describe that? Is it because the gaming world is a traditionalist on its products? Is it because people want the look and feel of the games to be the same?
There's an element of psychographics as well of the player, as you were saying, right? The psychology. But and then there's also the technology disruption. I mean, what is really happening? In reality, the technology disruptions are R&D is huge.
And when they were attempted, they didn't really work. Like when they tried to merge skill and RNG games, didn't work.
Correct. So then, I mean, you read a lot about these upcoming trends. Is VR going to change the experience? Is AR going to change? But many a times it depends as well on the evolution happening in the hardware dimension as well, right? So it might take time. I would say from an innovation point of view of the sector, there are other softer elements that are happening. For example, market penetration. How can we access through Malta new markets? We're very close to Africa. What is happening within the African space? Can Malta stand to benefit? Can there be African companies that want to penetrate the European market? The diaspora, can Malta be a base for that? Yeah. You know, so I think it's a very nuanced question. There's no
straight answer to give.
Straight answer to that. The most important, I would say, is listen. We do have an ecosystem that works, that generated important results for the economy, employment, value added, ancillary services. It's an industry that we want to keep, protect. But and then there might also be an element that we need to improve the economic fundamentals of the industry.
In what sense?
In what sense? How can we improve productivity?
And we have 3 minutes to go.
Okay, so how can we improve productivity of the sector? Can it be that we need to become much more productive from a sectoral point of view? Can it be that we need to streamline regulatory elements? Can it be that we need to streamline access to finance, banking solutions, right? So how do we continue making attractive? And that most probably is also a discussion not only on the gaming sector, but on the macro level. How does Malta retain its attractiveness in a changing, evolving economic landscape, right? Okay. So I think here, and it might be a good closing of debate, the elements of education.
Okay.
So how do we continue to sustain a pipeline of trained human talent that the industry needs? How do we continue to ensure that these companies have access to banking payment solutions within the country and don't need to look into external sources, right? So this is a question ultimately that the jurisdiction needs to answer.
JP, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. And I would also like to remind you that we'll have more editions of the SiGMA podcast coming in a few weeks' time. And you can follow everything on our YouTube channel, so please subscribe and also post notifications in order to be updated with new content which is published continuously on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.